Hey all, so we're back for another Spotlight with Context video, and we will be going over Sandman today. Obviously, one of the most requested characters of all time, and I'll address the elephant in the room. I've already seen a fair number of people more hyped for Shocker. I think this kind of makes sense because Shocker's kit is fairly straightforward. He either does the thing or he doesn't, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. But Sandman definitely has a lot more going on, and so is a little bit harder to clock. He also has some brand new, interesting abilities, so we have a fair amount to talk about here. But I do think that Sandman is a very good addition to the contest, and throughout this video, I want you to keep in mind that the core concept for him was, in the words of his creator, how would you build a grappler in Marvel Contest of Champions? That is a fighting style that is fairly common in a lot of other fighting games, but not so much in ours. Sandman is an attempt at that, and in my opinion, a successful one. So let's get into the broad strengths and weaknesses. So first off, he just puts a ton of debuffs on the opponent, as in double digits most of the time. And so if you are running the Despair or Inequity Masteries, he synergizes really, really well with those. He can easily hit the cap for both of them. And he has one of the higher health pools in the game in general. So basically, always being at the Inequity cap means that his effective health can be about 50% higher at all times. He can pretty much always shut down healing even before taking into account the fact that some of those debuffs are petrifies, meaning that he can reverse it. And he basically just always has debuffs on the opponent. He also has a really interesting triple suite of immunities to bleed, poison, and shock. This isn't brand new, right? We have characters like Nebula, but it is quite rare. And having this in science in particular is going to open up some uses for him in a number of different places. It also means that as a defender, being immune to bleed and shock in particular are going to slow down some of the go-to skill attackers, such as, off the top of my head, Black Widow Deadly Origin. There's some nuance to that, and we'll get to it later, but it's a very interesting immunity suite to say the least, and it does mean that he works pretty well with the Liquid Courage Masteries because his Special 3 only rotation is quite good, and so you can just bypass the negative effects of them altogether. And then his unstable state just makes him passively unstoppable, and this can be for up to 20 seconds. That means that you can use it to counterpunch to get easy intercepts. It makes special dexes easier because if you accidentally get clipped by one, you can still dex out of the rest. There are a lot of advantages to being unstoppable for a long time. And on top of that, he just hits harder and generally is better in this mode. On the weaknesses side, in part because he is immune to two of the most skill types of damage, he is pretty vulnerable to critical hits, which is the other thing that skill champions are very good at. This chips away at his resistance ups, makes him less tanky, and also means he has less fuel for getting into and staying in unstable state. Additionally, Sandman does care about having his debuffs on the opponent, and so enemies that constantly strip this away are going to cause some problems for him and just basically tank his damage. That said, he does have so many debuffs that he can kind of overwhelm some skill characters. He can probably put Mole Man into frenzy more easily than anyone else. And when you're fighting somebody like Kingpin, even those rage debuffs will still help him out for looking for debuffs on the opponent. So he's kind of in a bit of a middle ground there. He likes to have his debuffs stick, but he has so many of them that he's not quite as vulnerable to a lot of Purify mechanics as some others are. Additionally, if you can turn off his Unstoppable, well then everything I said about the benefits of being unstoppable for a long time kind of goes away. So slow and decelerate are an issue. So as we already talked about, he's immune to bleed, poison, and shock. Very cool. His personal debuffs can all be inflicted through block, so if you're trying to keep them on you, fighting him as a defender, you're going to need to be very careful to learn his special dexes. And as an attacker, this does mean that sometimes you can make progress by YOLOing the specials a little bit. They're paused during all special attacks, both Sandman's and his opponent's, and they expire one at a time every second. So that means they fall off one at a time, kind of like Atuma's Cruelties or Howard the Duck's Furies, and each one lasts 1 second. So if you have 20 debuffs on the opponent of a single type, that means that you're going to have one of those effects for 20 seconds, and 20 of those effects for 1 second, and everything in between, right? Imagine like a big triangle going off to the side. And it means that it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to figure out exactly what effects you have, because if you can be anywhere in between 25% effects and 5% effect, then what you're often going for, the real effect that's probably on the opponent, is going to be somewhere in between. And so when you are looking at the ceilings of what his debuffs can be, keep that in mind and kind of evaluate everything. My personal recommendation would be at about 2/3 capacity, because that's going to be roughly what it feels like for a lot of the uptime. Also, whenever you knock down the opponent with a heavy attack, Sandman gets an indefinite heavy proficiency passive, increasing his attack rating during heavies. These stack up to 10. His heavies are his big source of damage in unstable state, and so you are going to want to build these. You can do this at any point during the fight. 10 means that you don't have to land that many of them, and he will do good damage without hitting 10 of these. So don't think that you have to rush to this counter and play him parry heavy only, but this is a pretty important thing to weave in when you can. So, Resistance Up passives. Resistance Up is also found on Spider-Man 2099, and this means that this increases both physical and energy resistance. The potency here, 110. If I remember correctly, these are roughly 5%, but if you think about that max of 20, that means that you can max out at about 2200 because of the way diminishing returns works. Off the top of my head, I think that's around the 30% area. And so it's going to be somewhere in between that most of the time. This does definitely make him tankier, especially when you consider something like the Inequity Mastery also lowering his opponent's attack. He can be quite tanky, but this isn't quite like Absorbing Man levels of just shutting off certain kinds of damage. So he gets these every time he strikes the opponent with a light or a medium, so a 5-hit combo can give you 5. And then as a defender, he also gets these hitting into block. So what this means as an attacker is that you're probably going to want to alternate, maybe parry heavy, parry 5-hit combos, and work on gaining both resistance ups and your heavy proficiency passives as you work your way towards unstable state, which we'll get to in a minute. Additionally, hitting Sandman with a crit or critting into his block is going to remove a resistance up, and when he is immune to a bleed, poison, or shock effect, he also loses resistance ups. So this is kind of that nuance that I mentioned earlier with somebody like Black Widow Deadly Origin. She is terrible at doing shock damage to Sandman. And that means that she is not going to do a whole lot of damage overall to him, and you're probably not going to be winning any speed races in Battlegrounds with her. On the other hand, she is amazing at keeping resistance ups off Sandman, because as long as you have Widow's Insight up, every one of your light attacks is going to strip away 2 of his resistance ups. He'll basically be at 0 constantly. He doesn't have any kind of crit resistance, and so just your basics are going to be hitting for full. Whether that's worth it is going to be something you have to keep in mind. It also means somebody like Hitmonkey is very good at controlling his stacks, but again, Hitmonkey would be missing out on critical bleeds. There's an interesting relationship between the normal skill nukes and his defensive abilities, and he's going to slow some of them down even as they are some of his best answers. Just kind of keep that in mind and experiment as he starts showing up. So, the reason you care about your resistance ups on top of just being a little bit tankier is that when you get to 20 of them, you enter unstable state. Now, you are unstable for 20 seconds or until you run out of resistance ups. Most of the time, this is going to be less than 20 seconds, both offensively and defensively, but you do kind of have that fallback if you really need to be unstoppable for that long. You no longer gain resistance ups, you lose one whenever you block an attack or you are struck. So if you can stun Sandman and then hit him while stunned, you can also strip these away on defense while he's stunned. And then when that 20-second timer ends, he loses all of them anyway. So it's kind of a whichever comes first thing. While unstable, he is going to be unstoppable the whole time. And he also is going to inflict 10 suppression buffs. And 5% suppression buffs means that this starts out reducing the opponent's combat power rate by 50%. Now, remember that most opponents' combat power rates are not 100%. Rank 3s are at 110, rank 5s are at 120, and so your opponent is going to have something more like 60 to 70% combat power rate left, but this is still pretty darn good at reducing how much power you're feeding them when you enter unstable, and this is a good reason to be aggressive early in unstable while you still have these suppressions up. Light and medium attacks are going to consume a resistance up when you hit the opponent, when you hit their block, or just when you throw them and hit nothing at all. This also means that fighting a defending Sandman, if you are dexing your way or blocking out of a combo, then you are going to chip away at his resistance ups that way. And if he hits your block and you're not parrying, it's also going to do damage to you, same as an attacker. Whenever you hit the opponent or their block, assuming you don't get parried, hopefully you don't, you're going to deal this same burst of damage. It's not a lot of damage, but just little pieces of burst damage throughout the fight will add up. Also synergizes very well with something like the Hulk Relic. So the final hit of his heavy or special 1 or 2 will also consume up to 5 resistance ups. This follows the same rules, meaning that if you dex his heavy, or you dex his specials, he's going to burn up those resistance ups. This is why I said, whether it's offense or defense, unstable state very rarely lasts a full 20 seconds. Because either you as an attacking Sandman, or you as an attacker fighting Sandman, are probably going to do things to get rid of those resistance ups faster than that. And then that same last hit of the heavy's special 1 or 2 is going to deal a burst of damage for each of Sandman's personal debuffs on the opponent. And that is also going to scale for each time during this unstable state that you've knocked them down, right? So because each heavy consumes 5 resistance ups, that means you have an opportunity to do this 4 times. So the first one will do, however many debuffs they are times this number. The second one will do 2 times however many debuffs are on them times this number. Third one will do 3 times however many debuffs are on them, etc. I'm spelling this out a little more clearly than I need to, because also remember that his debuffs are going to be falling off one at a time every second. And so it can be a little bit hard to clock when you first start playing him how much damage your heavies are going to do, because also remember, if you're not maxed out on heavy proficiencies, your attack rating is going to be going up as you're landing these heavies and knocking the opponent down. This also, of course, works with special 1 and 2s, but those animations take longer and do not contribute to your heavy proficiency passives, nor do they benefit from them. So while that can be a good part of the flow of the fight, and you shouldn't avoid his special 1 or 2, maximum damage is going to come from his heavy. The other fun thing about his heavy attack while unstable is this Quicksand header here. If you're struck by a basic attack while charging that heavy, you're already unstoppable, right? Because you're unstable. You also become passively indestructible, so you shrug that off and then hit them with your heavy. This means that you can charge it pretty darn freely. So that first hit of your heavy is going to root the opponent and remove stand your ground, so that you then don't have to worry about chaining the next heavy into them and having them block. Striking a rooted opponent is also going to lock you in place, so that neither you nor your opponent basically fly away from each other from the impact of your heavy. This is that grapple moment that you've been working towards. This is the focus of his kit. You build up into unstable. You have these resistance ups to consume, you get close to your opponent, and now you throw heavies that you are locked in place against them until you are done throwing heavies. They gain less power from it because of the suppression debuffs that you apply when you enter unstable, and every time you knock them down, you're going to do more and more burst damage. Those numbers start small, but they ramp quickly, especially if you can get a decent number of debuffs on the opponent. But note that this locking in place is disabled when you try and dash back, because this does mean that if you feel like you're giving the opponent too much power, you have an out. If you have slightly misjudged things, or you just want to make sure they don't go red on you, you can back off, let that 2.25 second root expire, and then your opponent will behave normally. So the special one is going to give you 1 resistance up on activation, and then 1 on each hit. It's 4 hits, that's a total of 5 resistance ups. Nice quick way to ramp on top of your 5-hit combos. You're going to get the same basic thing with 8% petrifies, but times 2. There are 4 hits, and so this can be up to 10 petrifies. Now obviously, on defense, this is going to just be the on activation, because then you're probably going to dex the rest of them, but just keep in mind it is part of a slow ramp. On offense, it's obviously a much better ramp, and I want to talk about the petrify debuffs, because 10 of them at 80% is of course reducing your opponent's regen rate by 80% and their ability power rate by 80%. And if you have the Despair Mastery, then that can be up to another 100%, assuming your opponent is running Recovery, because most people do. Then that's going to be a base rate of 115 minus 180, and so you're going to be at negative 65% on their regen rate. And therefore, if your opponent would be healing 100 per tick, they're going to be taking damage of 65 per tick. Pretty darn solid regen reversal. It will calm down a little bit as these debuffs fall off, but if regen reversal is your goal in a fight, you can pretty easily keep it up by spamming the special 1. The special 2 is going to give you even more resistance ups. You get 2 on activation and then 1 on each of 8 hits, so 10 total for the special 2. And then you are going to inflict so many decelerate debuffs. You get 6 decelerates right away, and then 3 on each other hit. Like I said, there are 8 hits, so that means you get up to 30 of these decelerate debuffs, and that is a 210% reduction in the ability accuracy of evade and unstoppable effects. It's really important to note that decelerate is a flat reduction to those effects, meaning that even one of these 7% debuffs is going to completely turn off any evade with a listed chance of 7% or less. So you get 1 decelerate debuff on the opponent, Black Widow is not going to be able to evade anymore. You get 2 of these up, and a Max Sig Cassie Lang is not going to be able to evade anymore. The fact that you get 6 of these on activation means you start with a 42% flat reduction to evade ability accuracy, which turns off even a fully ramped Spider-Gwen with 5 charges. This is really solid utility. Additionally, because this does cap out at 210, while it's very, very difficult to keep it at that ceiling, you can keep it over 100% pretty easily if you need to, And so this can even work for somebody with extra ability accuracy like the champion boss in 6.2. Also, like we talked about during discussing Unstable, 30 debuffs on the opponent is going to be significantly more damage for your heavies, and so this one is very good at ramping you for that. So, the Special 3 is going to give you 30 physical vulnerability debuffs. Again, 30 personal debuffs on the opponent means more damage. Physical vulnerabilities also means more damage, and is scaling along a different axis than your attack going up with the heavy proficiencies. So these will stack and compound and allow you to do quite a bit of damage. Like I mentioned earlier, if timing isn't necessarily your top priority, the Special 3 is the best damage rotation. There's less utility in it, but it does really, really well. You also get 20 resistance ups, meaning that you instantly go unstable and can take advantage of those 30 physical vulnerabilities. And if you are already unstable when you get here, you're going to inflict another 20 physical vulnerabilities. That means that the single best damage payout you can do in this kit is usually to get to 20 right as you reach 3 bars of power. Ideally, the way you do that is that you have been gaining power by throwing heavy attacks as well as combos, which means that you're getting to 3 bars of power with several heavy proficiencies already online. You go unstable, you immediately throw your Special 3, you come out the other side, and the opponent has 50 physical vulnerability debuffs on them, as well as 10 suppressions, and now you can wail into them with your 4 heavy attacks, and they will have 60 or close to 60 personal debuffs on them for that whole time, and you'll be gaining even more heavy proficiencies, and their physical resistance will be negative. It's a really nice cash out. Then for the SIG ability, while you're unstable, you also get an Indefinite Fury passive, and it's pretty chunky. 2400 extra attack before your heavy proficiencies come online means that you're going to be doing a lot more damage while unstable. Plus, those heavy proficiencies get up to twice as strong, and so now it becomes that much more important to ramp him. I want to talk a little bit about this before we move on to the synergies, because I've already seen some worry that Sandman is just going to be another slow ramp-up champion. I encourage you to think of him more along the lines of somebody like Kate Bishop, where the damage is enough for short fights, and it just gets better in long ones. If you need the utility, you might lose out on some damage in the short run, but the utility itself is very powerful, and so is probably going to be helping you in some of those fights. And then in longer fights where you are able to really use the Special 3 to max out your heavy proficiency passives, that's when the damage gets kind of bonkers. The upper limit of this guy is really impressive. So keep that in mind, and don't write him off as a ramp-up champion just because he can ramp up. Those two things are not always connected. So, talking about synergies, he gets teammates with one incarnation of the Sinister Six. That's your standard plus 5% block chance, or perfect block chance. And then with the other incarnation of the Sinister Six, he gets extra 10% combat power rate for all of those champions. And this is pretty darn good. Sandman getting extra combat power rate means you're going to have more debuffs on the opponent because you're throwing more specials. Mysterio having more combat power rate means that you can use his specials more often, especially the big Fury on the Special 3 and the Power Drain on the Special 2. Scorpion throwing more specials is amazing. Iron Patriot exists. Red Goblin throwing more specials is amazing. Shocker throwing more specials is amazing. This is a really good synergy, and it comes on the 2-star, so pay attention to this one. Definitely makes all of these characters easier to use. Bring Me a Dream, obviously a fantastic synergy name with Mantis, gives her a true accuracy buff for 10 seconds whenever the opponent's inflicted with sleep. This is going to mean that if you use her big Special 2, not only is the Special 2 going to land, but you're not going to have to worry about evade or auto block for the duration of that special, and for probably a full combo or so after, allowing you to close out the fight. In a lot of matchups, this isn't going to be huge for Mantis, but it is going to let her take fights she otherwise might not have, like, say, Guardian or Sam Wilson, who might have auto-blocked her. And then for Sandman, you get a Fury passive after your special 3, which of course is going to stack with the heavy proficiencies, with the Fury from the Sig, while in Unstable, and is just going to allow you to do that much more damage. And again, attack rating is a different axis from negative physical resistance on the opponent, and so you are multiplying your damage 2 different ways, and so Furies are really good for him. Interested with Venom and Green Goblin? This one for Venom is very good. A flat 10% increase to his chance to nullify a buff off the opponent and then heal from it makes Venom more reliable both as a buff controller and as a healer. Very good there. And then Green Goblin is going to get a burst of damage every time he power drains the opponent. Obviously, Green Goblin is not incredible, but there are already a few synergies for boosting his power drain chance. Combine that with this, and his damage output will definitely go up as well. Increasing Sandman's Petrify debuffs from 8% to 10% moves his healing reversal potential up quite a bit. This is a really solid one for him. And then I just want to go home. The extra power drain potency for Spider-Man Stark Enhanced makes this much better since you can't access it that often. Stealth Suit gets a little bit tankier on the way up, not too bad. And then Sandman gets a miscounter. And remember that he can get 30 decelerates off the special 2. They fall off one at a time and pause during specials. So this is more than 30 seconds of a miscounter whenever he throws his special 2, and you can obviously keep throwing them, so takes a little bit to get there, but quite good for that. And then that is Sandman. Like I said, I think he's a really good addition to the contest. He fulfills an interesting spot in the science class. I think he does deliver on that fantasy of a grappler. He does really good burst damage. He has interesting immunities in a class that probably needs those. And then he also has some really nice utility. Between the Decelerates and the Petrify, he's another science champion that's quite good at healing reversal, so you could use him against somebody like Absorbing Man. And then the Decelerates are also going to let him turn off somebody like Thing or Rintra, and just not worry about that Unstoppable. There's some really good stuff in this kit, and I recommend you keep an eye out for the gameplay when that drops later this month. Until then, thank you so much for watching, and take care.